I was 9 years old the first time I understood what it meant to be invisible. My father was standing at the kitchen counter reading the mail. My older brother had just shown him a ribbon from the school science fair, second place, yellow, not even gold. And my father lit up like someone had plugged him into the wall. He pulled my brother into a hug, ruffled his hair, said, "That's my boy," loud enough for the neighbors to hear. I was standing 2 feet away, holding a painting I'd made. My teacher had framed it. She'd actually framed it, put it in a real wooden frame, sent a note home saying I had a gift. I remember the weight of it in my hands, how I kept adjusting my grip because I was nervous I'd drop it. My father glanced at it. Then he went back to the mail. That was it. No comment, no smile, nothing. I stood there for another minute, just in case. Then I walked back to my room, set the painting against the wall, and sat on the edge of my bed looking at it. I didn't cry. I think I was too confused to cry. I kept thinking, maybe he didn't see it. Maybe I should go back out and show him again. I never did. I told myself that story for years, that he just hadn't noticed, that he was distracted, that it wasn't what I thought it was. Children are very good at protecting themselves from the truth when the truth is too heavy. I got so good at it that I carried that protection all the way into adulthood, rewrote 1,000 moments into something more bearable, made excuses for a man who never once asked me to. My name is Waverly. I'm 31 years old. And this is the story of the day I finally stopped making excuses. Growing up, our house had a clear order of things. My brother was the future. I was the footnote. It wasn't that my father was cruel in an obvious way. He never screamed at me, never said anything outright awful, at least not until much later. It was quieter than that. It was the way he'd ask my brother about school and ask me if I'd eaten. It was the way he'd show up to every one of my brother's baseball games, but forget, genuinely forget, like it had never been written anywhere, that I had a piano recital the same afternoon. It was the way he talked about the future, his future, my brother's future. Never mine. My mother tried, in her way. She'd squeeze my hand under the table sometimes, give me that look that said "I see you," but she never pushed back on him. She was a woman who kept the peace because she believed that peace was the most important thing. I understand her better now than I did then. I forgive her, but for a long time, her silence felt like its own kind of abandonment. By the time I got to high school, I had learned to need very little from my father. Not because I didn't want his attention, I wanted it desperately, the way you want water when you're thirsty, but because wanting it and not getting it hurt more than just going without. So I went without. I poured everything into school, into work, into building something that had nothing to do with whether or not he was watching. I graduated at the top of my class. My father came to graduation, sat in the bleachers, and took exactly 2 photos, both of them of my brother who was there to watch, not to walk. I got a full scholarship to study architecture at a university 3 states away. My father's response when I told him at dinner, architecture. That's a tough field. Not congratulations, not I'm proud of you. Just a quiet prediction that I would probably struggle. I moved away 6 weeks later and didn't look back. The years that followed were hard in the way that real growth is always hard. Not dramatic, not cinematic. Just the daily grind of building something from scratch when you don't have much of a foundation to stand on. I waitressed through undergrad. I took on freelance drafting work in grad school for money. I slept on an air mattress in a studio apartment for 14 months because I refused to ask my parents for anything. I graduated with my master's degree and immediately got hired at a mid-size architecture firm in Chicago. I was good. I knew I was good, not in an arrogant way, but in the way that people who have worked obsessively at something for years eventually know. You just feel it click into place. Within 2 years, I was leading projects. Within 4, I was a senior associate. Within 6, I was being approached by investors about starting my own firm. I said yes. Obviously, I said yes. Callaway Design Group opened its doors on a Tuesday in October, and I stood in the empty office space before the furniture arrived and just breathed. That was it. That was the whole celebration, just me standing in my own space, breathing. I didn't call my father. I didn't post about it. I just stood there and felt it. The firm grew faster than I expected. We won a regional award in our 2nd year. By year 3, we had 30 employees and a client list that included 2 hotel chains and a hospital system. I hired a COO, brought on a creative director, built something real. I told my mother occasionally in pieces. She was proud, I think. She'd say, "That's wonderful, honey." And I believed her. What she told my father, I don't know. He and I had settled into a comfortable distance by then. Holidays when I could manage them. Brief calls on birthdays, the performance of family without the substance of it. I was okay with that, or I told myself I was. The invitation came 11 months ago. My cousin's engagement party, big family gathering, my aunt's house outside of Cincinnati, everyone invited. My mother called to ask if I was coming. I almost said no. I had a project deadline. I had 1,000 reasons, but my grandmother was going to be there, and she was 83, and I am not the kind of person who says no to 83-year-old grandmothers, so I booked the flight and blocked the weekend and told myself it would be fine. It was not fine. The party was in the backyard. String lights, catered food, the whole thing. Maybe 60 people. My extended family, loud and warm in the way large families can be, everyone catching up. Kids running around the edges of everything. My grandmother held my face in both hands when she saw me and said, "You look like someone who's figured something out," and I laughed and said I was working on it. My father arrived late. He came in through the back gate with my brother, who'd driven up from Columbus, and I watched them walk across the lawn together with the ease of two people who talk every week, who know each other's news, who share inside jokes I'm not part of. My brother had put on weight and was happy. He worked in sales. He was getting married next spring. My father hugged my aunt, shook hands with my uncle, kissed my grandmother on the cheek. He made his way around the gathering the way comfortable people do, unhurried, welcomed everywhere. He got to me eventually. He said, "Waverly, you look tired." That was his hello. I said I'd been busy. He said that was probably good. Then he moved on. An hour later, someone, my uncle, I think, trying to fill a lull in conversation, suggested we go around and share what everyone had been up to. Big family updates. A lot of people groaned good-naturedly, but it happened anyway. People started talking. My cousin and her fiancé shared their engagement story. My aunt had retired. My brother announced that he and his girlfriend were expecting their first child, and the whole backyard erupted. Applause. Laughter. My father grabbing him in a bear hug, emotional in a way I had never once seen him be about anything involving me. I sat with my wine glass and watched my father's face in that moment. He was glowing. That is the only word. He was absolutely glowing with pride and joy and love, the kind of love that radiates off a person, and it was all pointed at my brother. Then someone pointed at me, Waverly. "What about you? What's new?" I opened my mouth. Before I could say a single word, my father, who was still half smiling from my brother's announcement, said, casually, to no one in particular, "Waverly does her own thing. She always has. Some people build families, some people build." He waved his hand. "Careers." He said it the way you'd describe someone's harmless quirk, like I was the aunt who collects ceramic cats. Someone laughed, nervously. Someone else changed the subject. My father took a sip of his beer and looked at my brother again. I set down my wine glass very carefully. My grandmother, sitting next to me, put her hand over mine. She didn't say anything. She just held my hand, and that small warmth was the only thing that kept me from walking out right then. I stayed another 40 minutes. I hugged my grandmother goodbye. I said polite things to the people who deserved polite things. And then I got in my rental car, drove to the hotel, sat on the edge of the bed, and let myself feel every single thing I had spent 22 years refusing to feel. I didn't sleep much that night. But somewhere around 2 in the morning, something shifted. I stopped crying and started thinking, and what I thought was, he has never once looked up. He doesn't know anything. He has spent 30 years being so certain of what I was that he never bothered to find out who I'd become. And then I thought, what if he found out? Not in a dramatic way. Not with a speech or a confrontation or any of the things that would make me look like I needed something from him. Just, what if he saw? What if he simply, finally, had no choice but to see? I opened my laptop. I looked something up. And then I made a phone call that changed everything. Here's what my father didn't know. He didn't know that 3 months before the engagement party, Callaway Design Group had been approached by a commercial real estate development group called Harmon & Voss to serve as the lead architecture firm on a flagship mixed-use project in downtown Cincinnati. Big project, multi-year contract. The kind of thing that gets written about in industry publications. He didn't know that as part of the contract negotiation, I had been offered a small equity stake in the development entity, standard for lead partners on projects of this size, and he didn't know. Because it wasn't public yet, because it had only been finalized 2 weeks before the party, that Harmon and Voss had just quietly acquired the commercial property management company where my father had worked for 18 years, the company that held his pension. The company whose letterhead he had faxed things on since before I finished middle school. He worked for me now. He just didn't know it yet. I hadn't planned it. I want to be clear about that. It wasn't some elaborate chess move I'd orchestrated over years. It was just business. It was just the world being small in the particular way that ambitious people in mid-sized industries sometimes discover. But sitting on that hotel bed at 2 a.m, I realized that I had a choice about what to do with it. I could do nothing. Let it surface on its own eventually through some HR memo or org chart update. Or I could choose the moment. I called my attorney in the morning. I called my contact at Harmon and Voss. I asked some careful questions. I confirmed some things I needed to confirm. And then I made one more call to my mother. I need a favor, I told her. I need you to organize a dinner, family dinner, just immediate family, at a place I'm going to book. Don't tell Dad it's from me. Just tell him it's for Father's Day. Can you do that? She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Waverly, what are you doing? Something I should have done a long time ago, I said. Nothing dangerous, I promise. Will you help me? She helped me. Father's Day fell on a Sunday 6 weeks later. I flew back to Ohio on Saturday night. The restaurant I'd chosen was called Gable and Stone, a newer upscale spot in downtown Cincinnati that had gotten a lot of local press. Clean lines, warm lighting, the kind of place that felt expensive without being cold. I had eaten there once before, during a site visit for the Harmon and Voss project, and I had liked it. What my father didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Gable and Stone was one of 6 restaurant-level commercial spaces in a building that Harmon and Voss owned. A building that was now partially mine. I arrived early. I had asked the host to seat me last, after everyone else was already at the table. I sat in my car in the parking garage for 22 minutes, going over nothing in particular, just breathing. When I walked in, my father was at the head of the table. My mother was next to him. My brother and his girlfriend were there. My aunt had been invited too. My mother had extended it a bit. They had wine already. They were laughing about something. My father looked up when I came in. Waverly, he said, neutral. Didn't know you were coming. Surprise, I said, and sat down. The dinner was pleasant, mostly. My brother talked about the baby, the nursery they were setting up, names they were considering. My aunt asked about a home renovation. My father talked about a golf trip he was planning for July. At some point, my mother mentioned that he'd recently gotten a new manager at work, someone brought in by the new ownership group. Corporate people, my father said, with the mild contempt of someone who's spent a career distrusting people in suits. They're going to come in and reshuffle everything. Always do. I said and sipped my water. After the plates were cleared and before dessert came, I reached into my bag and took out a card. A simple white envelope with his name written on the front in my handwriting. I set it next to his water glass. Happy Father's Day, I said. He looked at it. Then, at me. Something shifted in his expression, a flicker of something, not sure what. He picked it up. Inside the card, I had written this part carefully, rewrote it 4 times. It said, I've spent a long time wishing you could see me. I've decided to stop wishing and start showing. I think you'll find the enclosure interesting. Behind the card was a single document, a 1-page summary from Harmon and Voss on official letterhead outlining the equity structure of the Cincinnati Development Project, my name, my firm, my stake, and at the bottom, highlighted, the name of the acquired subsidiary, the company where my father worked. He read it. He got to the bottom. He read it again. The table had gone quiet in that way where everyone can feel that something is happening but no one knows what. My father set the paper down. He looked at me. And for the first time in my 31 years of living, I saw something in his face that I had never seen before. Not pride, exactly. It was too complicated for that. It was the particular look of a person realizing they have been looking at something wrong for a very long time. It was recalibration. It was the slight collapse of certainty. You're with Harmon and Voss, he said. My firm is the lead architecture partner, I said, and I hold an equity stake in the parent entity, which now includes your division. Silence. My brother said, "Wait, so you're basically, it's not a direct management relationship," I said calmly. "But yes, in a structural sense." I folded my hands on the table. "I thought you should know." My father looked at the paper again, then out the window, then at nothing. My mother was very still. I let the silence sit. I had earned this moment, and I wasn't going to rush it with words. Some things don't need narration. Some things just need to be felt. Eventually, my father said, quietly, "I didn't know." I said, "You never asked." I said it without cruelty. I meant it without cruelty. It was just a fact, the plainest fact of my life, spoken out loud for the first time in 31 years. You never asked. You never looked. You had the whole story decided before I ever had a chance to write it, and so I wrote it somewhere you weren't watching. I picked up my wine glass. I took a slow sip. I set it down. "I'm not telling you this to embarrass you," I said. "I'm telling you because I spent a very long time trying to earn something from you that I've now realized I don't actually need. I built this on my own. I'm proud of it. And I wanted you to know, just once, without any ambiguity, that the person you wrote off is the same person who built the building we're sitting in." He opened his mouth, closed it. Dessert arrived. The waiter, bless him, seemed to sense something and set the plates down very quietly. I stayed for dessert. I hugged my grandmother, who was not there but who I called on the drive back to the hotel. I told her what happened. She laughed for a long time, a real, full laugh. And then she said, "Baby, I always knew you were going to be something. I always knew." I told her I loved her. She told me she loved me more. I'm not going to tell you that dinner fixed everything. It didn't. My father and I are not close now. We are not in the middle of some healing arc where he calls me every Sunday and apologizes for 30 years of smallness. That's not what happened. I don't think that's what's going to happen, and I've made my peace with that. What changed was simpler and more important than reconciliation. I stopped carrying the weight of his opinion. For most of my life, even when I told myself I didn't care, even when I moved 3 states away and built my firm and won my awards, some small part of me was still standing in that kitchen at 9 years old holding a painting, waiting to see if he would look up. That part doesn't run your life, exactly, but it runs in the background, a low hum of not enough that colors everything. After that dinner, it went quiet. Not because he finally approved of me. He might never fully approve of me, and that's okay. It went quiet because I finally completely stopped needing him to. There's a difference between proving something to someone else and simply knowing something yourself. I had been confusing the two for decades. That dinner was the last time I needed an audience. Everything after that is just mine. My work, my choices, my life, built in the daylight, no longer assembled in secret to be revealed to someone who wasn't paying attention. My firm is doing well. We just signed a new contract in Nashville. I'm thinking about opening a second office. I still paint, sometimes watercolors, usually nothing serious, just for the pleasure of it. There's one hanging in my office. My grandmother has another one. My father, I'm told, mentioned to someone at his office that his daughter was in architecture, that she'd done well for herself. He didn't call me to say it, but someone told me he said it. And I'll be honest with you, it didn't make me feel vindicated. It didn't make me feel triumphant or relieved or any of the things I might have expected to feel. It just made me feel done. Done waiting. Done needing. Done standing in the kitchen with a painting in my hands, wondering if this will be the moment he finally looks up. I set the painting down a long time ago. It turned out I didn't need him to see it. I just needed to keep making them, and so that's what I do. I used to think that the hardest part of being overlooked was the moment it happened, the glance that slid right past you, the sentence that erased you, the silence where a compliment should have been. But I was wrong. The hardest part isn't the moment. It's the years after, when you keep carrying it without realizing you still are. My father never called me a failure out loud. He was subtler than that. He just consistently, quietly, arranged his attention so that I was never quite in the center of it. And I spent 3 decades absorbing that arrangement, as though it were a fact about me rather than a limitation in him. What I've come to understand, not from a book, not from a therapist, though I've read books and sat in that chair, is that the choices we make in the dark, when no one is watching, when there's no applause and no audience and no father's approval waiting at the finish line, those are the choices that actually build a life. Every late night I stayed at my desk in that studio apartment, every client I over-delivered for, every risk I took on my firm, none of it was witnessed by the person I once most wanted to witness it. And it grew anyway. That's the thing nobody tells you when you're 9 years old holding a painting. The work doesn't need an audience to be real. There's a kind of cause and effect that isn't dramatic. It doesn't announce itself. It's just the slow accumulation of what you put in and what that produces, not as punishment or reward from some outside force, but as the natural consequence of sustained effort meeting sustained intention. My father put his attention into my brother for 30 years. My brother is a good man, and he is loved, and that's real. But my father also, in the same 30 years, put nothing into understanding me, and the consequence of that, the plain arithmetic consequence, is that he arrived at a dinner table one Father's Day and discovered a stranger sitting across from him. A stranger who happened to hold equity in the building around him. I don't say that with bitterness anymore. Bitterness would mean I still want something from him, and I've checked, I don't. What I feel now is closer to clarity. The kind of clarity that only comes when you stop confusing someone else's blindness for a verdict on your worth. If I could go back and say one thing to the girl in that kitchen, 9 years old, painting in hand, waiting, I would tell her this: keep making things. Make them for yourself, for the sheer fact of making them. Make them when no one looks up. Make them when the room is empty and the approval never comes. Because the making is the point. The life you build in the absence of recognition is the truest one you'll ever have. And one day, without even trying, you'll walk into a room and realize that what you built while no one was watching became impossible to ignore. I'm still painting, still building, still making things in the quiet. That's enough. It always was.